Hi. Tonight we're going to talk about real property, estates, and interests. Basically, this is, how do we use the verbiage terminology of real estate, and this will be important for your exam so you understand how deeds and interests and everything are described. Vocabulary is very important. So pay attention and listen to where we're going. Thanks. We're going to talk about the rules of priority interest in personal property. We're going to talk about the different types of freehold estates, and then we're going to identify the different types of future interests that can be created through this process of real estate. Real property estates and interests. An interest in property is either a present interest or future interest in property. We either own it today, now, or we may have a future interest through a will or through a granting or something like that, or through purchasing it. An estate is an interest in having two characteristics. We have the right to possess, and then the length of time that it may last. We can possess it for a few minutes, or we can possess it for many years. The present interests in real estate are divided into two types. The freehold is the ownership interest in land. We call this a freehold interest, the freehold estate. And then we also talk about the non-freehold, something less than an ownership. It may sometimes be referred to as leasehold estates. In other words, we only have it for a small period of time, and then if we give up the right to use it, it reverts back to the freehold owner. There are several types of freehold estates recognized by American law. The first one is the fee simple absolute. So the most popular common term you're going to hear while you're doing this real estate business is that you're going to have fee simple absolute, aka the fee simple. That's what you're after. That's the best, highest, easiest way to sell real estate. It's called a fee simple absolute. The fee simple defeasible. It can be a fee simple determinable or a fee simple subject to a condition, and we'll talk about those kind of things. There's also something called a fee tail, and then there's a life estate. The present interest that we have again the freehold, the non-freehold. Within the freehold, you'll see the fee simple, the fee tail, the life estate. We have what's called the freehold absolute, the freehold defeasible, and then below is the non-freehold that we'll go into later in Chapter 13. You'll learn more about that. Fee simple absolute is ownership that is characterized as complete ownership lasting until the end of time. The end of time, basically the end of somebody's life until they pass it on, but that's how we complete the end of time. The holder of fee simple absolute interest may do any of the following within their interest. They can sell it, they can gift it, or they can convey it. Again, totally up to the holder, the owner. Fee simple defeasible is an interest that may be cut short by the occurrence or non-occurrence of a condition, a limitation, or a restriction. So an example, fee simple determinal, ownership interest that automatically terminates upon the occurrence or non-occurrence of the event. So O conveys Blackacre to A as long as they're used for the raising of livestock. So another thing like that might be where we give our land to a nature conservancy, or we donate our real estate to a college or to some other kind of charitable interest. And as long as they're using it, as long as it's used for the intent that we determined it would be, then it stays the possession of who we've, quote, given it to. The fee simple subject to a condition subsequent. An ownership interest that is subject to condition and generally provides for the grantor's re-entry and termination of the estate. A conveys Blackacre to A on the condition that A never marries. An example of that would be DeVue Park. DeVue Park was donated to the city of Covington by the DeVue family. They actually went back and tried to sue to get interest back. You can imagine DeVue Park in Covington, if you're familiar with that area. It overlooks the city of Cincinnati, many acres of land, extremely valuable if somebody was to stop the park and sell it off for development. And the family decided that they wanted it back because they're saying the original conditions of the park, there was no alcohol to be served, and if there was a swimming pool ever built, it had to be single-sex swimming pool. Again, this was early 1900s when the land was donated, and they wanted to recognize those kind of things. Over time, they built swimming pool. The swimming pool obviously is co-ed; anybody can swim in it. And they built a golf course, and they serve alcohol at the golf club. So the family went back and sued to say that they wanted the property back. The courts came back and basically said no, because these conditions of owning the land and running the land are contemporary to what's going on in today's environment. So they didn't do that. But that would be one of these conditions subsequent kind of a things. If you stop doing or if you do something, the land reverts back. Fee tail is an interest in which the estate must be inherited by the lineal descendants of the grantee. Only recognized in a few states, all other states will simply classify as fee simple absolute, and Ohio is one of those. O conveys Blackacre to A as the heirs of his body. So basically, again, another way for land to transfer is through the estate process. Life estate. It's an estate in which the property is held for the duration of a person's lifetime. To Bianca for life, for the life of Bianca then. A life estate per vie arises when measuring a life that is someone other than the holder of the life estate. To Bianca for the life of Charles is an example of this. What happened with the trust department, I used to manage the Moorline farm on Port Union Road. To drive by it today, it's industrial buildings, but Mrs. Moorline outlived her husband, and she inherited the house and the estate, and then she remarried. When she remarried, she gave a life estate to her second husband and basically said as long as he was able to live at the house, he would be cared for. The trust would pay all the expenses of the property until he died or until he had to move out to go to senior housing or something like that. And that eventually did happen. I remember going to the estate and standing on the steps one day and looking out over basically the fields into the Tri-County area and seeing all these industrial rooftops, which is basically what you're seeing in that part of Fairfield now, down to Tri-County, down to Springdale. A lot of industrial development, and the farm today is now industrial development. But he was able to have a life estate there. Then when he moved on off the property, at that time, the Moorline kids basically inherited the property, came back to them, and then younger Mr. Moorline had the ability to sell it or do what he wanted to do based on the trust. Eventually, they did sell it because the Moorline family didn't have anybody living in Cincinnati anymore. They lived in Alaska, and they didn't want to keep the property here, and they knew that it was valuable for this industrial development. So the life estate, Mr. Moorline, the second, basically wasn't Mr. Moorline, but the second husband of Mr. Moorline, Mrs. Moorline, could live there for the rest of his life until no longer. Future interests can be held by the grantor, and that reverts back to the grantor. There's a possibility of the reverter. Anytime you see the reversion or reverter, something comes back to the owner or back to the family, and then the right of entry. And then it can also be held by a third person. Remainder man is also the heirs, the future heirs of people, or the remainders. They can have vested or contingent interests, vested through the marriage or contingent based upon a marriage, or they can have the executory interests. Again, not a lot of things you'll have to know for the test, but they're just out there. Again, future interest, the chart, the way it's held by the grantor. Reversion, again, after life estate comes back. A possibility of reversion after the fee simple determinable. The right of the grantor to enter. And then held by a third person. Again, the remainder or the executory interest. Future interest held by the grantor. The reversion, again, occurs after a life estate. It's automatic, reverts back to the family. This is kind of like rental property, too, or leasehold estate. You, as the tenant, don't own it. It's going to revert back to the owner. So this is the reversion piece. The possibility of a reverter occurs after a fee simple determinable, and the grantor may choose whether to terminate the interest or not. The right of reentry occurs after the fee simple subject to conditions subsequent. So we can come back after if they don't do or they fail to do what they're told to do to be able to continue to own the estate or have the estate. Future interest held by a third party. The remainder, occurs after the natural expiration of the prior estate. Again, vested, the person receiving the remaining interest has been ascertained, or contingent, the person receiving the remaining interest has not been ascertained. Executory interest occurs after the previous interest is cut short. Again, not a lot of that you need to know for the real estate exam in the state of Ohio, but these are out there. They're part of this whole process of the freehold estate and what it's described as. The rules of contingent interest. The rule, this thing called Shelley's case, merges a life estate in the grantee with the remainder of the grantee's heirs, so the grantee's heirs can continue to stay there if that's the way it was written and meant to be. The doctrine of worthier title provides that when a grant creates a future interest in the heirs of the grantor, the future interest is void and the grantor has a reversion. And in Ohio, we don't recognize this thing called the worthier title. So again, not something you're going to have to really worry about. The rule against perpetuities holds that all future interests in real property must vest within 21 years after the death of someone who is alive on the effective date of the grant. Again, it's to put a time limit on this whole thing so that things can be ascertained and life can move on. And that is it for this lesson. It ends pretty quick tonight. Thanks and have a great one.